Welcome back to the channel and the podcast, guys. As always, thank you very much for tuning in. As you will be able to tell by the title of this video, this week's topic is breaking bad habits. So again, I've made quite a few notes on this as there's a lot of stuff that I really wanted to make sure that I cover within this topic. So yeah, we're just going to delve straight into that today. So a lot of the stuff that I'm going to go over is actually stuff that I have taken from the book Atomic Habits. Now, this is an absolutely fantastic book. I would recommend every single person watching this to read that book if you haven't already. It was one of the very first ever books that I read all the way through. I always really struggled with reading in terms of I'd get very bored very quickly of books, but that was the first book that I literally could not put it down. It was so fascinating, and I really enjoyed some of the references that it gave to elaborate on the topics that it was talking about as well. So yeah, absolutely fantastic book. If you haven't already, make sure you read it. So yeah, I think when it comes to breaking bad habits, probably one of the best things that you can do to try and resolve that is by trying to remove the cues or reduce the exposure of whatever it is that is causing these bad habits. Because essentially every habit that you have, whether it's good or bad, goes through the exact same process, and that essentially all starts with a cue. Now, that cue can determine whether that ends up being a good habit or a bad habit. But regardless, that cue is going to be there. So you've almost got to try and make it invisible. Because, again, a lot of us will do these habits without even thinking about them because they're that ingrained into us and we've not really given much thought to it. So naturally, it just runs like clockwork for us. So an example of this would be, take something like food. Let's say you're trying to watch your calories, you're trying to cut back on your food intake because you want to lose some weight. If you go to open the fridge or the cupboards and there's chocolate, fizzy drinks, just crap quality of foods just all around the house, you're exposed to all these foods, which is then obviously going to increase the likelihood that you are not going to watch what you're eating because you're exposed to it. And again, another example of this, and this is an example that is used in the book, where you might not even be thinking about food. You might not think, oh, I'm hungry right now. But if you walked into a room and there is a plate of cookies on the table in this room that you've just walked into, regardless of if you've walked into that room thinking about food or not, even if you haven't been thinking about food at all, there's a very high likelihood that you see this cookie and you're probably going to have one because it's right there, it's right in front of you. No one's stopping you from taking it. So I think whatever the habit is, you need to firstly try and identify what this cue is and strip it right back. A lot of people, the cue is some sort of emotional response, stress, boredom. If people are feeling upset, depressed, this can be the cue that ultimately sends you on this road down that bad habit. So try and identify the cue and reduce the exposure. And I think another thing I want to touch on that is about your environment. There's a really good quote in the book: motivation is overrated, your environment matters more. And again, this was an actual study that they did in the book. I believe it was in Boston. And there was a hospital that was trying to prove that by changing an environment, they could help hospital staff and patients to be healthier. So previously in the cafeteria, pretty much everywhere you looked were fizzy drinks, soda drinks, high calorie, high sugar. So they were the first thing you saw in the fridge. There was a basket of them right next to where you went to pay, and it was pretty much one of the first things that you saw when going into this hospital cafeteria. So what they did was they changed the layout of the cafeteria. They put all the bottles of water to the front of the fridges. They then put bottles of water by the cash register, and they also placed additional bottles of water throughout the store. So in this case, it was obviously doing the opposite, and it was increasing the exposure on the water. And again, I can't remember the percentages off the top of my head, but over like a month period, soda sales were down massively and water sales were up massively as well. So again, that just goes to show the importance of your environment. During the Vietnam War, whenever that was, I can't remember the exact date, there was a lot of US soldiers that were taking heroin whilst they were in Vietnam, because it was very easy to get over there, and everyone was doing it. So there was a large percentage of these soldiers that were taking heroin. Now, the interesting thing about this was that they found that as soon as these soldiers went back home, they just completely stopped taking heroin, because you've taken them out of this environment where it becomes easy to access heroin. Obviously, it's a very stressful state, and they put them back home where potentially they've got families, they've got kids, wives. So it's a completely different environment, which makes it a hell of a lot easier to stop. And that is why I think the exact number of this, I think it was not, they say 90% of drug users that go to rehab end up relapsing. Because again, you look at the environment, let's say you're a drug user, chances are your environment, you're also going to be surrounded by fellow drug users, potentially. So all that's happening is you're being taken out of this environment where you're surrounded by drug users. You're then getting pulled into rehab. And the primary goal with rehab is to provide you all the help, tips, support that you can possibly need to come off it. But then what happens when you are no longer deemed to need rehab anymore? These same people get sent back to the exact place where they came from, because they've got nowhere else to go, and they get placed in that same environment, which is predominantly why 90% of people relapse. So yeah, environment is massive. You could say the same for drinking. Like if you're trying to quit drinking, which I've actually, my next podcast episode is going to be on drinking, so look out for that as well. But yeah, if you're trying to quit drinking, yet all your friends in your friendship group and your whole environment is surrounded by going out and drinking, you're going to make that very difficult for yourself. So to summarize, your environment is going to matter a hell of a lot more than how motivated you are to try and break this bad habit. If you're motivated to stop taking drugs, if you're motivated to stop smoking, stop drinking, if you're trying to be more motivated to go to the gym, start running, whatever it is, you've got to first assess your environment. Another key point to note when it comes to breaking bad habits is make the bad habit unattractive. You've got to try and reframe your mindset and highlight the benefits of avoiding this habit. So again, let's take drinking as an example. If you're trying to break the habit of drinking excessively, you're trying to cut down. Almost say in your head, what are the benefits of cutting down on your drinking? So like you'll sleep better, you'll feel better, you'll perform better, you'll be more productive, you'll have more energy, you won't have like 2-3 day hangovers, which again affects how you're feeling at work, how much you're going to the gym, affects how much you're running. Like you have to really highlight these benefits, which then will naturally reframe your mindset. I'm going to talk a lot more on this in next week's episode. That was the main reason for me quitting drinking, was following this process, in terms of I made it so unattractive to the point where so I was almost highlighting all the negatives. So I was thinking like, oh, I feel shit for 2-3 days. I don't want to train. I don't want to run. I don't particularly eat well. Like I just feel rubbish. So I was highlighting all the negatives so much that the thought of the alcohol was just so unattractive. Habits are associations at the end of the day. They are feelings. Two people could look at the same bottle of beer and one person could have the urge to drink it. The other person could be repulsed by it. Same with cigarettes. Two people could smell the same cigarette and one person would then get the urge to want to smoke. Another person would be repulsed by the smell. It's all based on associations and how you associate the thing in question. So you also want to look at increasing friction and increasing the number of steps between you and the habit. The easier something is to do, the more likely you are going to do it. So if you can increase these number of steps and make it as hard as possible for you to do the thing, chances are you're not going to do it. Because guess what? Most of us, we don't like doing hard stuff. So again, you could relate that back. So previously, how I mentioned about you walk into a room and there's a plate of cookies on the table and having the cupboards filled with crap foods. If you don't do that, let's use cookies again as an example. If you sat at home and you're thinking, oh, I really fancy a cookie, but you've then got to go to the shop. So you've got to get in the car, you've got to drive to the shop, you've got to pay for the cookies, you then got to drive home just to eat them. Some people out there will be willing to do that, don't get me wrong, but It's making it harder to do that. And again, I think a good example they used in the book was screen time. If you wanted to try and limit the fact that you watch telly before bed, again, if you've got the remote sat next to you and you're lying in bed, it's super easy to just turn the telly on. All you got to do is pick up the remote, turn it on. Whereas if every time you finish watching TV, you turn the plug socket off, unplug it at the wall. If you're then laid in bed and you think, oh, I could just put some telly on now, but then you know you've got to get out of bed, plug it in, turn it on, and then turn the telly on as well via the remote, you'll probably be less inclined to do it because it's a lot harder. And I know it's not the most hardest thing in the world, but you'll be surprised just by adding in them extra steps, your brain will just talk you out of it. You'll say, oh no, I can't be bothered with that. Whatever the habit is that you're trying to break, try and identify how you can increase the friction between that. And I think this is one that's probably not spoken about as much, but I think make the costs of your bad habits painful. I don't mean painful by physical pain on yourself. I mean more in the sense of there's some sort of consequence that comes off the back of you doing it. Can't remember what the habit was off the top of my head. Basically, two friends almost had this pact where if one of them did the habit, like I said, I can't remember what it was, he would have to transfer the other person like $10 or $20 or something like that. Again, you'll be surprised and that's what I mean when I say about making it painful. That's going to be painful on your bank account if you have this pact and you have this accountability partner, and if every time you do something you have to pay somebody else money. That could be a really useful tool. Or again, you could flip that on its head and almost see that as a positive. So let's say you were trying to cut down on going out for food, like to restaurants, or cut down on takeaways. Every time you feel like ordering one, that money that you were going to spend on the takeaway, transfer it into a savings account and use that towards a holiday, because you're constantly you're almost rewarding yourself for doing it. So again, you're getting that like dopamine hit in your brain, and it then becomes rewarding. So you're associating not doing the thing as rewarding, which again is only going to help you for that reward loop in terms of making it easier to break the bad habit. So yeah, I hope you found that episode useful, guys. I personally think there's quite a lot of valuable takeaways from this video. So if you did enjoy it, please make sure to drop the episode a like, and feel free to drop a comment with your thoughts on the episodes, anything you agree with or anything you'd add or even disagree with. Please do let me know in the comments below. Thank you as always for tuning in. Don't forget to check out last week's episode, which will be appearing on screen somewhere now. Hope you have a good week, and I will see you in the next episode.